Now, playing against a team like the United States, and we talked about the roster, who we wanted to see in that starting 11. What is the point and the purpose of playing these friendlies against a competition that is number 45? So many times we see fans talking about this on social media and in the competition, and we saw this in the friendlies at the end of 2021. So our top things that we want to learn from the women's national team in these April friendlies, let's dive into it. Lori, when you're looking at these teams, we talked about the low block and that helped dictate a starting lineup that you wanted to see for the United States. What is Vlatko Andonovski looking for, whether it's from this group of players, this type of competition, or even leading up to the start of World Cup qualifiers that he needs to see?
Yeah, well, I think we should take a step back. I think to your point about playing a team like Uzbekistan, who's ranked number 45, it's not as simple as just like, closing your eyes and like throwing a dart, right? And like hoping that you get like a higher ranked team. I mean, I do think it is important to remember that there are still some COVID implications in regard to all of this and getting teams to come over. And then there's TV rights deals for US soccer. So it's not as easy as just like, hey, let's get the top teams over here, especially when a lot of the top teams are European based and they're about to play in the Euros and they're not wanting to travel to come over to the United States right now for whatever reason, right? Because they want to play competition. So there's a lot to mix in there. So I think that is important. However, I still very much think that there is, like, regardless of the ranking and the growth of women's soccer in general, this team will be an interesting feat for the for the United States, because I think it's always asking questions. How can we continue to get better? We've talked endlessly about how young this core group is, what that's going to look like in compared to the NWSL, which we know can get pretty spread out, wide open transitional league. And I don't think this game or these two games are really going to offer a transitional type game. So then it adds another layer to it, right? How do players, and Jill touched on that with her starting lineup as well, how do players react? How can they be impactful in the same way when you don't have as much space? So all of that said, the three things that I think that listen, if I'm the coach, what I would be looking for is one, patience in the buildup. And I kind of hit on it a second ago, which is sometimes we think of it like, when we think of patience, we think, okay, we have to slow things down. But we know that the U.S. likes to play at a fast tempo. We know they want to go to the goal as quickly as possible, and you want that in their DNA. But sometimes that is not always the best way to break teams down, because then it's turnovers. You get frustrated if you're not scoring. So what does that look like? And that's when I talked about Andi Sullivan being critical in terms of helping set play, switching the point of attack when necessary, and just being a bit more patient, still moving the ball quickly, but also finding that extra pass when it's necessary. Where is the team giving you? Is it out wide? Do they shift quickly and try to lock you in? So is it on the other side? So patience in the buildup is the first one. And then two, I think one of the most critical things is the positioning of our outside backs with our wingers. When teams sit in a low block or a mid block, you have to find ways to be able to break that down. And I think I saw this watching the U.S., especially against Czech Republic in the She Believes Cup. A lot of times our winger and our outside back will be in the same plane, and it's easy to defend. Mm-hmm. So what is the movement? What does the pairing between those two look like? Is one coming in more centrally and one staying wider? Because then you ask questions. If you're stacked on top of one another, the defensive team just has to shift, and it's easily, so we end up putting ourselves under more pressure instead of asking questions of the defense. So that pairing and the positioning of that. And that's where I think somebody like Huerta could be really shine in these games, depending on, is she coming central, helping out with an Andi Sullivan almost as a 6, and then also being able to cover ground to get wide when we do lose the ball. And then
Lori, before you jump to your third point, TJ Trex here in the chat saying that he'd love to see an experiment with a 3-back. It's almost kind of what you're saying with Huerta sliding forward and into that 6. Do you think we could see a shift with either one of Fox or Huerta in the outside back position really staying high?
Yeah, well, TJ Trex. I just want to say that name. Thanks for the comment. Listen, I think this is a really interesting conversation to have because we can talk about formations all the time, and really, it's just about movement and fluidity. So it is kind of what I'm saying. Yes, let's say they are sitting back pretty deep, right? Uzbekistan. Then ultimately, it is going to look like a 2 or 3 back, depending on how many people that Uzbekistan puts behind the ball. So it actually starting positions might be a 4-3-3, but eventually as the game
Mhm.
moves on, then that's when it comes to the players, and that's what I'm talking about, the movement. Case in point, I don't know how many people on here watched the Bayern Munich men's team. They do this all the time, though. They have a back that goes into the number 6 position and helps like with movement of the ball when they are in possession, right? And so this is exact same thing. And we've seen Huerta, I mentioned her, but she does that with OL range. She will get into the attack more centrally and help circulate the ball around. So again, it depends on our positioning. It depends on the movement. The tempo has to be high. It can't be slow, otherwise it's too easy.
Mhm.
But it is about being patient and then ultimately players being able to step into where the space is.
Yeah, so you have patience in the buildup,
Yep.
the wingers and your outside backs, and making sure they're on the same page, but not in the same plane of the field. You have a
Yep.
third point for us, the third biggest thing you want to see from this.
And then Sullivan. I mean, I've mentioned her a lot of times. She will be the glue to this team in terms of movement of the ball, in my opinion, and being an outlet every time. Because there's going to be times, if we are being patient, where a floated ball in or a low percentage ball that's just floated into the box isn't going to be on. So if
Mhm.
Sullivan is going to have to be the person to say, hey, demand the ball, again, circulate it around, look for the little slip balls into Macario or Haran or Sanchez in our hypothetical starting lineups, right? But yeah, I think she's going to be key, extremely important to this team, and her getting these minutes in these games as she so does, then could be invaluable for this team going forward.
I think you make great points about all three of that. Patience in the buildup is going to be huge. Does the youth of this roster play a role in almost having to learn and make those decisions on the fly because they don't have a veteran in Becky Sauerbrunn in the back line to dictate how the tempo of the game is going to go and keep things moving? Who is the player that's going to need to do that in the patience, but also keep the ball moving?
Yeah, Sullivan, because I think there's times too when, if we go up one side and are attacking on the right hand side, if it's not on, then Sullivan being that outlet or whoever the midfield is in terms of rotation to be able to pull it back out to see if you can pull Uzbekistan out of a low block in itself to open up more gaps. So instead of just continuing to go, 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 can you find those moments, say, hey, it's not on, we go back around, then something opens up, right? Because you've pulled them out of their low defensive shape.
Great points from Lori. Jill, I want to pick your brain on this too, especially you have a bit of a defensive mindset as a goalkeeper, and you tend to look at that as well. But against a team like Uzbekistan that probably won't put too much pressure on the United States back line and even test a goalkeeper that frequently, what are you looking for in this game? What are some things that you really want to see from this side?
Um, I think for a long time, the US has been known for mentality, athleticism, speed, strength, all those things. And I think that one thing that we have been critiqued on or questioned on for a long time is our football intelligence. And I think a game like this could provide a lot of opportunities for players to read the game, find space, make space, exploit space. And I think that way that we're going to have to be versatile instead of just relying on, using some of our dynamic players up front. I think that is going to help us. Like, as we prepare for World Cup qualifiers, you're going to play against teams that sit in low blocks, and football is growing in the world, and qualifying for the World Cup is not a given for the US anymore. And Lori and I know that firsthand. We were on a team that had to do the playing game, right? Like, we lost to Mexico in the semifinal, and it's not a given. So having an opportunity to refine that and um, experiencing it for young players is going to be important. But like Lori said, like, and I think sometimes a young player is more inclined to see the goal and go, and like those services that we're talking about into the box, like, we're over it, all right, or past that, like,
Mhm.
we're moving on from that. So, I think it's going to be important for those young players to get experience and feel comfortable and be patient, even though they might feel like they have an opportunity at that moment to go 1v1, to just keep it and maybe open up better opportunities. So I think one would be the versatility, the experience, and then obviously getting younger players some confidence, because rolling a ball downhill gains so much more momentum, and like we're watching Sophia Smith and Mal Pugh be taking advantage of that momentum and that confidence right now in the league. So when forwards are flying, they're feeling good about themselves, like they're unstoppable at different times. And one thing I always have to add in something about the goalkeepers is another way that you can break that low block is something that we see Ederson doing and something we see Ter Stegen doing, is coming out high out of the back with the ball and
Mhm.
dribbling past the center backs. And what that does is it draws pressure from the front line toward you, because they got to get pressure on the ball. And typically, when the front line, the first line steps, then the midfield also steps. But if you don't get quick enough pressure on the ball, the back line drops. And what happens, the midfield stepping and the back line dropping, there's heaps of space between the lines for the goalkeeper to find that pass into. And if the back line decides not to drop, then you can play a ball in behind that back four into seams where you can utilize those quick players. So I think goalkeepers in this position, playing against teams that aren't going to press, have a real advantage to create
Mhm.
numerical overloads, especially in the midfield.
Those are great points you make. One thing that you mentioned, Jill, is not being able to just send balls in over the top, attacking mindset wise. I mean, the goalkeeper joining in and breaking those lines of press, one or two, is fantastic and definitely necessary. But once the United States gets the ball into their attacking end, and when we look at, let's use both of your starting front three with Pugh, Macario, and Smith up top, and Haran, Sanchez, that front five unit, what kind of attacking patterns do you want to see from them? What are the different options for unlocking a block?
I mean, I'll go a little bit. I think, when you look at a Macario, we know that she can stay high if she
Mhm.
wants and open up some space and play back to goal. She has that ability, but also she likes to drop in and get on the ball as well and look to see if she can get turned and faced up. So, that's a very simple one. If Macario is dropping in, then who's getting in behind, then and asking those questions, right? Because then that forces a center back to have to step in, or do they stay? And then where is the space if they stay? Who's picking up Macario? Who's not? Right? And then that becomes an easy understanding of where the space is. It's either in front of the back line or behind, depending on the timing of the ball as well, coming from the run. So that would be one. That's a very
Mhm.
general and very like
Yes.
simple one that we could be looking for easily. And then also something that Vlatko and Anasi talks a lot about, which is the triangles on the outside, the winger, that's that near side midfielder with that outside back. And again, that goes with like the positioning of in particular the winger plus the outside back on and where they are. Are they more central? Are they out wide? Or is it opposite, right? If Sophia Smith is on the right side, is she cutting in? Does Huerta need to provide the width then? What does that look like? So, I mean, all of that, all of those movements are dependent on how we're moving the ball. And then also, what is the defense giving you? So it's
Mhm.
easy for us to maybe sit here and come up with some stuff, but really are they shifting? Are they not shifting? Are they just staying? What time of game is it in? Are they exhausted? Right? Like, I mean, I think Jill made an interesting point about dribbling too. A lot of
Right.
defenses are set up for passing to deny passing angles. And that's what makes Rose so special when she's in, is because she wants to dribble. She wants to dribble at speed. It's so difficult to defend because a lot of teams aren't accustomed to that and they don't want to defend that 1v1. So, that will be interesting if Rose isn't starting. What does the defensive structure look like? And can they bring her in and getting the ball deeper roll and then start running at the back line?
One thing, Jill, you mentioned earlier is one of your key points that you want to look at is getting these younger players experience. And as Lori alluded to, so much of this game, there are no timeouts in soccer, newsflash, and there's nothing that you can almost
Heard it
reset.
here first.
Yeah, you heard it here first. If you missed that Bayern Munich game, now you know. They don't have time to kind of reconnect. So it's so much about having that footballer IQ and understanding the game and different ways to do those types of things. When you look at this younger group that's looking to get experience, that also needs to have a high football IQ, how do they do that on the fly, and what kind of needs to happen for them to problem solve mid game to unlock a team that's sitting in a low block?
I mean, yeah, we're talking about younger players, but we're not talking about inexperienced footballers. I mean, you look at Mal Pugh, she won a World Cup. She was on the World Cup
Yeah.
team. Sophia Smith, she is doing it at the highest level in the world, week in and week out in the NWSL. So, like Macario, like, yes, she didn't maybe not has that much experience with the national team, but like she just scored that amazing goal in Champions League. I mean, come on, like these are really intelligent football players who have done it at the highest level, who can figure out things on the fly. I mean, they're playing against some really tough defenders each week. And it's just going to be about their communication and their patterns of moving into space and finding those little gaps, which we see Pugh and Smith do so well up top, and Macario finding the space in the midfield. So, as much as we are talking about their youth, I think that these are really experienced younger players that maybe aren't coming in just out of college like we've seen in the past. So they're, seasoned almost in an NWSL, seasoned vets at this point.
Yeah, they exactly are. Someone leaving us a comment, Christopher, in our chat, asking about Rose Lavelle and types of roles that we could see her in. I had her as one of the players coming off my bench, slotting in alongside Ashley Sanchez in the midfield, because I want to see that partnership. But for Rose Lavelle, even this last weekend in the NWSL, Laura Harvey at Olive Reign played her on the winger. She was occupying those wide spaces. When you look at a player like Rose Lavelle and maybe this type of game, look into your crystal ball as to what to expect in this. But where can Rose be utilized in the skill sets that Lavelle has? Is it more centrally, and what can she provide when she is on the width and in the flank for a team like this?
Well, I was going to bring this up because Laura Harvey did speak to that directly,
Mhm.
and it is mentioned by Christopher Meister, I think is how you say it. Meister. Apologies if I'm not saying that correctly, but about Laura Harvey kind of protecting a Rose in those games. I personally, though, I didn't bring it up because I don't see Vlatko playing Rose as a winger. I think he strictly sees her as one of the best number 10s in the game, and knowing that they want to keep her healthy. He might not start her depending, and she might not play the full 90 just because of that. But I do think that the number 10 position is her best position. I think that's where she'd be the most utilized. I do think the NWSL suits
Yes.
Rose the most because she is so electric when she's picking up the ball in a little bit of a deeper role and then has time and space to be running at back lines. Again, it goes to directly what I was talking about, which is so difficult to pick up as a defender. The last thing you want to do is chasing Rose Lavelle or defending her 1v1. Excuse me, no thank you. And I was a midfielder. I was like, that'll be the last thing I didn't want to do. I'm like, where's Listen there? Help. You're getting the number 6. Tackle! However, I think that is a wise choice for Laura Harvey and what her team needs. And given the players that they have and it being a long season, I just think that Vlatko right now is strictly going to view Rose, or does view her as a 10. And given that the strikers they have would rather see who they have in the actual wing position that plays that position more often than he would in terms of putting Rose there.
Merchant Princess, giving a comment about Sanchez, Herran, and Lavelle combo in the midfield with Herran sitting back as the 6. Jill, you're shaking your head. Thoughts on this combo? I know you have Sullivan in that 6 role, but what are your thoughts on this trio?
Didn't Vlatko already try Herrera in the 6? And it just
Yeah.
didn't feel right. And I don't like it. And give me Andy Sullivan in the 6 all day.
But is she the only one on this roster that can play that 6th role?
Howell can.
Okay.
Howell for sure can. I think Howell will see come off the bench. I don't know if we see her starting. And they're actually 2 very different players, Howell and Sullivan, in the way that they play that position. So still very much a competitive spot there. However, right now I give the upper hand to Andy, just in the way that I think that what these games are asking for. I think that fits Andy's tool set more than it does Howell. And Andy has some more experience, and I think that's what you need in the center of the park in these particular games right now, especially given all of our points that we've made, limited time heading into the qualifiers.
The only other player that we've seen consistently play that, Julie Ertz, not called in, announced her pregnancy today. Congrats to the Ertz family.
Like, she's been pregnant for a year. Like,
yes. So, okay, before we dive into our last little segment, final thoughts from either of you on your starting lineups, on player rotations, different combinations of players that you want to see in these games, or anything else that you really want to learn from players or personnel or problem solving in these next 2 friendlies in April. Jill.
Yeah, I think everyone freaked out when we tied, what was it, Croatia in 21. And I think it's a work in progress. And I think we need to be patient, that not every game we play is going to be a dominating performance like we've seen in the past as football grows around the world. And if we want to continue to push the envelope and continue to grow football in our country, we're going to need young players to eventually step up. And I think we just have to be patient in that process and not expect 10-0 wins every time we play somebody that's under ranked number 10, So I think patience from us as supporters and fans, I think will be really important, as much as patience in the game will be.
Yeah, and I'll add consistency. I think when you start to put in players that don't have a lot of experience at this highest level, and limited caps, then consistency starts to become really important, because that is an element in terms of winning a World Cup, qualifying for a World Cup, is being able to, at this level, showing up and putting in great performances every game. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't going to be mistakes, but we saw that on the men's side, right? With qualifying as well. There's so much talk about just the ups and downs. We play one really good game and then drop points in the next. And it was this young mix of players that had to go through some of those growing pains. And, more and more with club soccer for women being more pertinent and important, this national team is going to have less and less time together compared to what it used to. So having that consistency, creating that camaraderie and those partnerships is just going to be vital. So that's a lot what I'll be looking for too, is from game 1 to game 2, do they still have those high standards, and can they put those consistent performances regardless of the scoreline, even though is a one parameter that you'd be looking at.
There's so many different things to keep an eye on in these 2 friendlies. Again, they're Saturday, April 9th, and then Tuesday, April 12th for the United States women's national team against Uzbekistan.